My Weirder-est School. Book number 12. Lil Mouse is in the House. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pellock. Chapter 7. Blah, blah, blah. It was graduation day. At last! I didn't care much about graduation, but I couldn't wait to see Lil Mouse live and in person. After I woke up, I brushed my teeth and put on my cap and gown. Then I went downstairs for breakfast. I look ridiculous, I announced to my parents. You're right for once, said my big sister Amy. Don't be silly, said my dad. You look very handsome, AJ. We are so proud of you, AJ, said my mother. She looked like she was going to start crying. It's just third grade, Mom, I told her. It's not like I'm graduating from college. Ha, snorted Amy, as if that's ever gonna happen. We drove to school and went in the side entrance to the all-purpose room. I don't know why they called it the all-purpose room. There are no dolphins in there. But the room was filled with teachers and parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and a bunch of other people who looked like they just showed up because they had nothing better to do. Some of the moms from the PTA were selling hot cross buns. The rest of the parents were taking pictures. Of course, parents love taking pictures. Oh no, I groaned. Not pictures. This is a milestone, AJ, my dad said. Everything is a milestone with parents. I could clip my toenails and my parents would say it was a milestone. Then they'd take pictures of me clipping my toenails. Ryan's and Michael's parents were taking pictures next to us, so of course the grown-ups had to gather the three of us together for a group shot. Don't they look handsome? Said Michael's mom. Smile! All the parents shouted. First, they took pictures of me and Ryan and Michael. Then they took pictures of me and Michael. Then they took pictures of me and Ryan. Then they took pictures of Ryan and Michael. Then they took selfies of themselves with me and Ryan and Michael in the background. Ugh, I thought I was gonna die from old age. Hey, let's get the brothers and sisters in there, shouted my dad. No, shouted me and Ryan and Michael. My dad once told me that when he was a kid in prehistoric times, people couldn't take 1,100,000 pictures of every little thing they did. Cameras needed this stuff called film, and when you ran out of film, you couldn't take any more pictures. I miss the good old days before I was born. Finally, the picture-taking torture was over. The parents were sobbing and blowing their noses into tissues. Well, they were blowing their snot into the tissues. It could be dangerous to blow your whole nose into a tissue. I can't believe my baby Ryan is graduating from third grade, blubbered Ryan's mom. It seems like only yesterday he was in diapers. Dude, I said to Ryan, you wore diapers yesterday? We were told to take our seats up on the stage. I had to sit between annoying Andrea and crybaby Emily. Alexia and Neil were sitting in the row behind me. Where's Lil Mouse? Neil asked me. I looked around. Lil Mouse was not in the house. Celebrities always show up late, I told Neil. That way they can make a grand entrance. Principal Stoker stepped up to the mic and made a peace sign with her fingers, which means shut up. Everybody got quiet. Welcome, third graders, said Mrs. Stoker. I have a question for you. What's brown, hairy, and wears sunglasses? What? We all shouted. A coconut on vacation, said Mrs. Stoker, and then she doubled over laughing. But seriously, kids, what kind of tree fits in your hand? I give up, we all shouted. A palm tree, said Mrs. Stoker. Get it? Okay, enough jokes. Before we give out your diplomas, some of your teachers would like to say a few words. One by one, teachers went up to the mic and said how proud they were of us. Blah, 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 said Miss Hannah, our art teacher. Blah, 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 said Mr. Docker, our science teacher. Blah, 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 said Mrs. Yonkers, our computer teacher. Blah, 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 said Miss Small, our phys ed teacher. Blah, 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 said Mr. Mackey, our reading specialist. They went on and on. Even Mr. Burke, the guy who mows the lawn, got up to say a few words. Oh, I was bored already. It would have been more interesting to watch glaciers race, and still there was no sign of Lil Mouse. I don't think Lil Mouse is gonna show, Alexia whispered to me. He'll be here, I assured her. He's probably in his limo right now, or maybe he's coming by helicopter. Famous people take helicopters all the time. Nobody knows why. And now, announced Mrs. Stoker, I would like to introduce your third grade valedictorian, Andrea Young. Smarty Pantsy Andrea got up and went over to the mic. Little Miss Perfect was smiling the smile she smiles to let everybody know she knows something nobody else knows. She took a sheet of paper out of her pocket. Thank you, Mrs. Stoker, said Miss Know-it-all as she looked around at the audience. Parents, teachers, fellow students, I am truly honored to be your valedictorian, blah, blah, blah. Andrea went on and on. This doesn't mean I'm smarter than you. This doesn't mean I'm better than you. This doesn't mean that I have a brighter future ahead of me than you do. Well, maybe it does. It's hard to tell, blah, blah, blah. She went on and on. I worked really hard this year. While you were goofing off and playing video games, I was studying. While you were wasting time watching YouTube, I was taking classes after school and reading the complete works of Shakespeare. I worked hard while everyone else was making fun of me for being smart. Well, who's laughing now? I'll be thinking of you when I'm at Harvard someday. My fellow classmates, I have one piece of advice. Keep your nose to the grindstone. Huh? What's a grindstone? Why would I want to put my face in a rock? And why can't a truck full of grindstones fall on Andrea's head? I want to finish, Andrea continued, by thanking all the people that made this possible. My teachers, Miss Daisy, Mr. Granite, and Mr. Cooper. My parents. All the tutors at my after-school programs. I want to thank Noah Webster for writing the dictionary, which I read every day. But most of all, I want to thank myself, because if it hadn't been for me, I wouldn't be standing here today. Thank me. I mean you. Everybody clapped while Andrea went back to her seat, smiling her annoying smile. The graduation torture was almost finished. Mrs. Stoker went over to the mic again. And now, third graders, this is the moment you've all been waiting for. Lil Mouse finally arrived? It's time to hand out the diplomas, said Mrs. Stoker. Oh yeah, I forgot about diplomas. But that's when the weirdest thing in the history of the world happened. Suddenly, the lights in the all-purpose room dimmed. There was the sound of an explosion. Music started playing. Colored laser beams flashed all over the place. The door to the back of the all-purpose room swung open. I heard somebody shout. Chapter 8. Lil Mouse is in the house. Everybody went crazy when Lil Mouse came running into the all-purpose room. Yo, 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 he shouted. Rappers always say yo. Nobody knows why. And now, said Mrs. Stoker, it's time for our guest speaker Put your hands together for my nephew, Lil Mouse. There was a roar like a jet engine in the all-purpose room. Do the mouse, kids started chanting. Do the mouse. Lil Mouse ran to the front of the room and jumped on the stage. He did the mouse dance for a few seconds, and then he grabbed the mic and started rapping. I'm happy as a clam. I'm happy as a clam. Who decided clams are happy? I say it's a sham. Life ain't so grand when you're living in the sand. Life is a dud when you live in mud and crud. Hey, that's not how the happy little clam goes, Neil yelled in my ear. Don't wanna be a clam, Sam I am. It's not my jam. I'd rather read my spam than be a clam. He must have forgotten the words, I shouted to Neil. I thought Lil Mouse was a lot shorter, Neil replied. If I was a clam, I'd sit and pout. What are clams so happy about? They can't go to Amsterdam or Birmingham. They can't even go to Disneyland unless they're fried. That doesn't even rhyme, Andrea said. You know what? I said. I don't think that's Lil Mouse. He's a phony, somebody shouted. A happy clam? I say that's a sham. It's a flim-flam scam. The flim-flam clam scam. That's a fake Lil Mouse, shouted Michael. This guy's terrible, said Ryan. Fake, 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 kids started chanting. Oh please, clams live in filthy seas. They don't have legs, and of course they don't have knees. We want the real Lil Mouse, shouted Alexia. Yeah, somebody else shouted. Boo! Everybody started booing. From what I hear, clams are really selfish. Well, what do you expect from a bunch of shellfish? You never see 'em peeing. They can't go skiing. They can't join the Air Force. They're just a food source. Boo! Get him off the stage. I bet it's Mrs. Rupee, I said. She's always pretending to be other people. I looked around. All of our teachers were there, but not Mrs. Rupee. It had to be her. She must be dressed up as a Lil Mouse. It's Mrs. Rupee in disguise, I yelled. Boo! We were drowning out Lil Mouse. He stopped rapping. And you'll never believe in 1,100,000 years who walked into the door at that moment. Nobody. It would hurt if you walked into a door, but you'll never believe who walked into the doorway. It was Mrs. Rupee. What? Sorry I'm late, announced Mrs. Rupee. I was stuck in traffic. Wait a minute, I said. If Mrs. Rupee is here and a Lil Mouse is also here, that means Mrs. Rupee cannot be Lil Mouse. Gee, Arlo, said Andrea. You're a real genius. No wonder you're in the gifted and talented program. I was going to say something mean to Andrea, but I didn't get the chance because Mrs. Stoker ran over to Lil Mouse. She reached up and pulled off his ridiculous mouse head. And you'll never believe in 1,100,000 years who was dressed up as Lil Mouse. It was Mr. Klutz, our old principal. What? I knew it was a fake, shouted Michael. Mr. Klutz, shouted Mrs. Rupee. What are you doing here? I had to be here, Mr. Klutz replied. I love these kids. I couldn't miss their graduation. This was the only way I could sneak into the building. That's when the weirdest thing in the history of the world happened. You'll never believe who walked into the door at that moment. Nobody. Didn't we go over this already? But you'll never believe who walked into the doorway. It was Dr. Carbles, the president of the Board of Education. What? Dr. Carbles looked around and saw Mr. Klutz. "Klutz!" he shouted. "I told you to stay off school grounds. What are you doing in that mouse costume?" But... We all giggled because Mr. Klutz said "but," which sounds just like "but," even though it only has one T. "Gotta run," said Mr. Klutz, and he ran off the stage. Dr. Carbles chased him out of the all-purpose room. He was screaming all the way down the hallway. "I'll get you, Klutz. This is the last straw." Huh? What did straws have to do with anything? After all that excitement, it was quiet in the all-purpose room. I had a moment to think about what had happened, and that's when it hit me. Mrs. Stoker must have been lying to us the whole time. She wasn't Lil Mouse's aunt. She probably didn't even know Lil Mouse. "You lied to us," I shouted at her. "Lil Mouse isn't really your nephew." "He is too," she shouted back. "You've got to believe me. Lil Mouse told me he would come to your graduation, but his flight home from England was cancelled. So I asked Mr. Klutz to take his place. I'm so sorry." Then Mrs. Stoker started crying. "Liar, liar, liar," everybody started chanting. That's when the weirdest thing in the history of the world happened. You'll never believe who walked into the door at that moment. It was Lil Mouse, the real Lil Mouse. "Lil Mouse is in the house," he shouted. He ran over and gave Mrs. Stoker a hug. "I felt so bad after my flight was cancelled," he told her. "I rented a private jet so I could be here. I couldn't let down my favorite aunt. Is it too late for me to sing a song?" "No!" everybody shouted. "Do the mouse!" we all chanted. "Do the mouse!" Lil Mouse did the mouse. Then he grabbed the microphone and started rapping. "I'm happy as a clam, I'm happy as a clam. Who decided clams are happy? I say it's a sham." Well, you know the rest of the song.